All right. Mr. Vidal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank you, both witnesses, to Ms. Bull and Mr. Metatawaban, for taking time to join us today. I know your opinion is valued by the committee. I'm going to ask one question first to Mr. Metatawaban. Your first recommendation, you talked about the opportunity to leverage financing for investment in infrastructure. You spoke specifically about housing, but also other infrastructure. Last week, we heard from the First Nations fiscal management folks about their concept of monetization as a methodology to leverage own source revenues into infrastructure investment to fill a very large infrastructure gap we have in First Nations communities. I'm really curious about just a little bit more of your concept of how you would utilize the leverage financing and how that would accelerate investment in infrastructure, and maybe more importantly, even to add to the end of that conversation, how it would remove barriers to Indigenous business successes in doing so.
I think it's important to realize that the capital markets have plenty of money to invest into good opportunities. And the Indigenous community is an opportunity for them to invest into providing finance while earning an interest. Indigenous communities are looking for low-cost capital to undertake infrastructure, housing, and business projects. The witnesses you heard on Friday have some great ideas on how to leverage some government backstop to attract private sector capital. Indigenous Growth Fund that we recently launched did that with the Business Development Bank of Canada, FCC, and EDC, along with the Government of Canada. We use this concept of a tiered approach to investors coming in and leaving in an evergreen model as a good model that can be utilized for around the world. We're just looking for different innovative financial mechanisms to attract public sector capital, because the government's unsustainable approach and inability to keep up with the growth of our community requires us to think differently outside the box and to co-develop different financial tools to ensure that we can do the work on the ground.
Just go to. Thank you for that. The other quick question I would have in follow-up to that is your third recommendation. You talked about kind of the more stable, longer-term funding models that would allow kind of more predictability, more sustainability, the ability to look further down the road. And I think if I heard you right, you kind of used the comparison of the 10-year grant program to First Nations once they've achieved kind of the eligibility or certification requirements, which I assume the same ones that are talked about under the First Nations Fiscal Management Act kind of process that's ongoing there. Could you just expand again briefly on just so we get it really clear, we get it in the report? I'd really like to hear kind of your concept of how that applies to the AFIs as well, kind of just a little bit kind of further dive into that third point you were making, if you don't mind.
I think with the government's recent support of the United Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, in there clearly states that we need Indigenous institutions to provide programs and services to Indigenous people. I think with the government's recent approach to supporting Indigenous communities that have good financial systems in place, that have a track record, they're being recognized with 10-year grants that provides them some flexibility around delivering services on the ground. As an organization that has been delivering the Aboriginal Entrepreneurship Program and been delivering $3.3 billion in lending, I think we deserve the opportunity, because of our track record and our success and our systems in place, to be allocated that 10-year grant so that we can start moving towards transferring services and responsibility to Indigenous institutions and communities. And this is a good growth area for the government with devolution and transferring services in a good